All right, so for our last video of 2023, we'll be back in 2024. We're going to take all the themes that we've covered previously and tie them all up through the discussion of What Happened to Anna K by Irina Rain.
My name is Alina Adams. I was born in Odessa, USSR. I wrote 2 books set in the Soviet Union. My daughter was born in America. I'm going to tell her about the Soviet experience through books.
All right, so throughout this series, one of the things that we've talked repeatedly about is that while I claim that this is me teaching you about the Soviet Jewish experience, are you learning? How's the learning going? Yeah. While it's me teaching you about the Soviet Jewish experience, there wasn't one Soviet Jewish experience. We've talked about people who came like my family in the 1970s. We've talked about people who came right after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. We talked about people who came recently. We've talked about people who aren't Jews but came with a lot of other Soviet Jews, so that affected their experience. This book, which is What Happened to Anna K by Irina Rain, fascinated me because it takes place in the Bukharian Jewish community, which I knew existed, but I knew nothing about it. They are primarily in Queens. They are much more traditional than many of the Soviet Jews who came in the 1970s. Like, for instance, my family knew very little about Jewish traditions. The Bukharian Jews have really held on to their particular traditions. They are very insular in that intermarriage is not something that's exactly celebrated in the community. We talked, I think it was last week or maybe 2 weeks ago, about how my name, Alina Siverinovsky Wickham, pretty much tells a very particular story. I don't think you're as likely to see those kind of names in the Bukharian Jewish community. So for me, the most interesting thing about it was how you can be a Soviet Jew who came at roughly the same time that my family and I did and had a completely different experience, both assimilating into America or choosing not to assimilate into America. That's another thing. We didn't really talk about that much, but here's a question for you. So you do some Jewish organizational things, and you meet American Jews and you meet Soviet Jews, or more likely children and maybe even grandchildren of Soviet Jews. What are some of the differences you see among them?
One thing I noticed is a lot of the the kids of the Soviet Jews, they don't know a lot about the religious aspect of being Jewish, while a lot of other ones who grown up on the Upper West Side, like the religious aspect of Judaism is something they're more accustomed to, while Soviet Jews is more like, it's kind of like a culture. It's their heritage, is who they are, but the religious aspect isn't something like, they don't know all the prayers, they don't know all of the, I would say routines, but I don't know if that's a proper word, but like what you do.
9 years of Jewish day school and you don't know what the proper word is. I feel my money was really well spent.
That was 3 years ago.
I know, she's all grown up now. But yes, exactly what you mean, the culture, the practices, whereas the Bukharian Jews, such as the ones featured in Irina Rain's books, they held on to it a lot tighter, and in some ways, they would be more, what, you mentioned the Upper West Side, she means the Upper West Side of Manhattan. She doesn't realize that people don't know that when you say Upper West Side, that means Manhattan, New York. Whereas the people who grew up on the Upper West Side, they might be familiar with these routines or rituals, but they don't practice them. Whereas the Bukharian Jews, they actually practice them a lot more.
Well, we see it with us. Not just because you sent me to a Jewish day school, but also like you know a lot of things.
She also studies really hard and knows lots of vocabulary words. SAT, here we come. Things, routines, rituals.
Well, you know a lot about like the culture aspect, but it's also connected with Soviet culture. Like, I feel like for me, when we like celebrate New Year's or we do stuff like that, it's kind of just like, I don't know what's Soviet, I don't know what's Jewish, it's kind of just like mashed together and that's just what we do. Well, I feel like a lot of other people have more of a strong distinction between those. When you first brought I'd say book, but
it is a book. I just happen to have read it electronically. It's still I read all the same words. I just read them electronically.
Well, I was going to say that when you came in with the laptop, I saw Anna K and I was like, okay.
Wait. Rotating, processing.
Anna Karenina?
Indeed. It's actually a Bukharian Jewish retelling of Anna Karenina, but not word for word. For instance, there's a lot less wheat. You know how in Anna Karenina there are entire chapters of Levin just going around and chopping wheat. For those of you who have seen the Woody Allen movie Love and Death, they do a very, very good parody of just how much wheat there is in Anna Karenina. There is not nearly as much wheat in What Happened to Anna Kay, but you can see the echoes of that book in this one. And when we talked about The Orchard, which was a loose retelling or an homage to The Cherry Orchard by Chekhov, we talked about the fact how it wasn't important to have read The Cherry Orchard to enjoy The Orchard. And it's the same thing here. You don't need to have read Anna Karenina in order to enjoy What Happened to Anna Kay. But if you have and you know how Anna Karenina ends, spoiler for those of you who don't.
I haven't read it.
Right, so no spoiler for you, is you do feel sort of a sense of dread as you go towards that. One might even say like a slow-moving train. Those of you who get it, you get it. Like a slow-moving train picking up speed going towards the end as you wonder if What Happened to Anna Kay is going to be exactly like Anna Karenina.